Hey Team Bio, welcome to your next screencast where I'm going to be talking a little bit more in detail about energy flow and nutrient cycles. We're going to talk about how energy actually flows through an ecosystem and a few specific nutrient cycles. But just a quick reminder, I want to say if you would like to use this image, these are just images I stole from your textbook. If you want to use these images to take your notes on, I've put a PDF of this this page on your Schoology, so you can print it out and take your notes directly on here, because I know it's hard to do all these drawings. Okay, the idea of energy flow and nutrient cycling is that energy is constantly flowing through an ecosystem. Light energy is converted to chemical energy by producers, and then that energy flows around the ecosystem as chemicals or nutrients cycle around the ecosystem between producers, consumers, and decomposers. Eventually, that energy is radiated out as heat, and the nutrients continue to cycle. So let's get into it. That's all the old stuff. Here's the new stuff. Okay, I want to introduce the idea of trophic levels. I'm sure you all have heard of a food chain before. So a simple food chain, we have our producers at the bottom of the food chain, which are consumed by our primary consumers, which in turn are consumed by our secondary consumers, which in turn are consumed by tertiary consumers. And these, each of these levels is a trophic level. So what do I want to say about this? Okay, so the bottom of the base of our pyramid here is called primary productivity. The sun is radiating down on Earth every day. A huge amount of light energy. It's actually 10 to the 19th kilocalories of light energy every day. This is like 100 billion atomic bombs going off. And most of this energy is absorbed or scattered or reflected by the atmosphere. But of the light that reaches the surface of the Earth, only 1% is converted to chemical energy through the process of photosynthesis. So imagine we have 1 million kilocalories of sunlight, only 1% of that is going to be converted to chemical energy through the action of photosynthesis. And this is called primary productivity. This idea that our producers are kind of setting the ecological budget for the ecosystem. So if you took all of the plants and dried them out and burned them up, that burning would release 10,000 kilocalories of energy. If we go to the next level, so our consumers that are eating, our primary consumers that are eating the plants, and we took the biomass of all of these things and burned them up, we would see that only 10% of the energy is on this second level. So if this was 10,000 kilocalories, then we only see 1,000 kilocalories of biomass of our primary consumers. And this is because 90% of the energy is lost as heat as you move up from trophic level to trophic level. So this grasshopper eats a bunch of plant matter, but it also bounces around and moves, and so and it has to break things down and build things up. And through all of those biochemical reactions, heat is lost, and only 10% of the things it consumes, only 10% of the energy of the things it's consumed is actually stored as chemical energy in its body. And this is what's called the 10% trophic rule. This idea that as you move up a trophic level, only 10% of the energy is retained as chemical energy in the bodies of the organisms, and 90% is lost as heat. So this is going to be 10% as well, and then we're radiating heat, 90% of the heat out at this level, and then as we move up, it's another 10%, and again, radiating the heat out. And, okay, I'm going to do my best. Imagine we had a hawk or an eagle. Oh, this is going to be a bad eagle or hawk. Oh, wow. Here we go. A hawk or an eagle came down and ate this snake. This would be a quaternary level consumer. And once again, we would find that only 10% of the energy of the tertiary consumers would be passed on to our quaternary consumers. So you may have noticed that top-level consumers like lions and eagles and orcas require a vast amount of area to sustain themselves. And the reason for this is this energetic constraint of the ecosystem. It takes a huge amount of energy to support a huge amount of primary productivity to support a quaternary level consumer. And so the ranges of quaternary level consumers are often really vast. So you need a huge amount of primary productivity to support things as you move higher and higher up the food chain. Okay, so how does this relate to humans? Well, we cannot escape this biological reality, the fact that as you move up a trophic level, only 10% of the energy is retained as chemical energy and the rest is lost as heat. So imagine you have a certain amount of vegetable matter. In this image we have corn here. Well, you can support a bunch of people on this corn if they're eating the corn directly. However, if these people are eating meat, you could take the same amount of corn and feed it to cattle. And again, 10% of the energy is going to be retained in the cattle's body and the rest will be radiated out as heat. And so this amount of corn, while could support 10 people here, if this person is eating meat here at the top, you would need to basically, all this corn that could support 10 people is now only supporting one, because this woman is eating a lot of meat. So the ramifications for people, as more and more people occupy the earth and more people want to eat meat frequently, we're going to need more and more plant matter to support that demand. Actually, one of the biggest contributors to global warming is deforestation of certain areas of the rainforest to support cattle grazing, because meat is in high demand. So interesting to think about your ecological efficiency of eating mostly vegetables versus eating meat. Okay, so swooping on down here to our cycles. First, we've talked about the carbon cycle a little bit. Okay, well, I guess I transition a little bit better. Okay, so energy, need a constant source of it to be to support the ecosystem, whereas our nutrients are going to cycle around. Big sources of abiotic carbon are in the atmosphere, as well as in the ocean, as well as stored as fossil fuels, coal and oil buried in the ground. So carbon cycles from these abiotic reservoirs to biotic systems when it's fixed during photosynthesis, and then passed to primary consumers and higher level consumers. It's returned to the atmosphere through cellular respiration, or when these organisms die, they can be broken down by decomposers, which are also going to return the CO2 back into the atmosphere through cellular respiration. In addition, sometimes these organisms can be buried deep within the earth and subjected to high temperature and pressure, and then we get gas and oil and coal and all that stuff. Okay, so that's the carbon cycle. Next, we have the phosphorus cycle. And phosphorus cycle is slightly different than the carbon cycle in that the big abiotic reservoir of phosphorus is in the ground. Well, it's actually kind of locked up in rocks, and when rocks weather, they release phosphorus into the soil. So phosphorus is not in the air. It's going to be in rocks and then released into the ground until you get phosphates in the soil. It can be assimilated into a biotic reservoir through plants. Phosphorus is really important in the construction of nucleotides and so DNAs and RNAs, and then it can be passed up the food chain as animals or consumers eat those plants, and then return to the soil when these things die and decomposers break them down. So now it's back to our abiotic reservoir in the soil. However, these phosphates can easily leach out of the soil into lakes and streams and the ocean. And then very slowly over time, these can precipitate out of solution and form rock. Obviously, that is a long process, but in this way, phosphorus can be returned to its abiotic reservoir in rocks. Often, phosphorus is the limiting or a limiting factor of growth in an ecosystem. It's determining how much primary productivity can take place there. So farmers often add phosphorus to their fields to encourage growth of plants. Okay, the last one is nitrogen. So just like carbon, a huge abiotic reservoir of nitrogen is in the atmosphere, but it's in a form, nitrogen gas, N2, that is inaccessible by most plants and animals, or I should say all plants and animals. And the only way this N2 can be converted into a form that plants can take it up and use it is through the action of nitrogen-fixing bacteria that convert the N2 to ammonia and then ammonium. So plants like legumes, beans, for example, have structures in their roots called rhizomes, which are like tiny little homes for nitrogen-fixing bacteria. They have a mutualistic relationship where these nitrogen-fixing bacteria are converting nitrogen from an unusable form into a usable form by the plant, and the plant is feeding them sugars and giving them a space to live in the roots. Often farmers will plant legumes. They'll cycle their crops and plant a rotation of legumes to help re-nitrogenify the soil. There are also just free-living bacteria in the soil that can fix nitrogen, and that can supply other types of plants with nitrogen. But conversely, there are bacteria that fix nitrogen, but there are also, especially in a low oxygen environment, bacteria that can denitrogenify the soil, convert it back into N2. So these are kind of competing forces here. So nitrogen, just like phosphorus, is often one of the limiting factors in the ability of plants to grow in a place. And so farmers, again, are often adding nitrogen to soil to encourage the primary productivity of plants. Nitrogen is an essential nutrient. It's used to build our proteins as well, so amino acids, the building blocks of proteins, as well as DNA and RNA. So are nucleic acids. Okay, so these are three main elements and their nutrient cycles through the ecosystem, through both biotic and abiotic reservoirs. We're going to be talking later on in the year about what happens when these cycles kind of get out of whack. And the downstream effects of those things. Sometimes, literally, when we're talking about the downstream effects of nitrogen or phosphorus, as rivers run into oceans, or kind of metaphorically, the downstream effects of releasing a lot of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Okay, that is all. I will see you all in class on Thursday.